Hello and welcome to another video. I think this is video 5. Today we will be looking at finishing up the API routes we have for our authentication. Earlier on today we created the register API route, and that just took care of creating the user in Hasura. Checked for if there was an existing user. If there was, it threw back an error. Just to notify the user that they couldn't create an account. We did that primarily just for security. I kind of don't want to throw back an error to say, hey, this email exists, and tell the user that that email exists. Although they would probably assume if they get an error that they can't create an account, that's probably why. What we'll do now is we'll dive in and we will create the API route for login. So we're going to follow most of what we've done here in terms of creating the token at least. We'll do that inside of login. But obviously login, we need to check that the user exists and that the token matches. So I'm doing the email and password authentication stuff manually myself using bcrypt. And we're just kind of hashing that password and generating a salt for it. I haven't chose to use a custom auth provider. Primarily just I want to keep this as basic as possible and not have too much in the setup if somebody else wants to run with this. But when we kind of get to an MVP, a V1 of this, hopefully we can maybe just look to plug in different adapters and what have you for authentication. But let's keep this very, very simple for what we're doing. So I'm going to open up the login API route. We've already imported the Hasura admin client, and if we just remind ourselves what that is, it's simply just got our secret, our admin secret as a header, and then it uses the API endpoint to the GraphQL API of Hasura. So we don't need to change anything here. All we need to do is kind of work on this login part. So what we'll probably do is we will first begin by importing GQL from Hasura so we can write that query. And then we'll just do a query here, and we'll just call this get user by email. And then we'll create that GraphQL query. And we will create a query and we'll name it get user by email. We'll pass in email as an argument, which is of string, which is non-nullable. And what we want to then do is we need to find all users where that email is equal to email. And then we want to return the ID, the name, and the email. Now I knew what this argument was because if you remember back in register, we did a similar thing. It's the same thing. We could probably export this from here and import it there, but that's just a bit yuck. So what we'll probably do is we'll probably abstract this, put this into a folder for queries, and then we can import that same query. And then maybe we can pass in kind of the fields we want. But let's just keep it super simple for now, and we'll just define these separately. And I really like this approach. It's just a GraphQL query at the end of the day. I can open this file and pretty much, like if we look inside of register, I've got a pretty good understanding of what is going on just by looking at the code. There's not many imports for me to kind of have to parse and kind of keep in memory. It's kind of just nice that I can see exactly what's going on. So I do prefer that approach. But also, as these kind of fill up and if we add any additional functionality, we may end up with having to write further queries and abstracting those into a folder. Maybe better suited, but we'll find out. We'll see how far we go with this. So our first query when we go to login will be get user by email. And then obviously we will get all users and we'll filter where that email is equal to the one we provided. And we provide the email and password. And because we're using Next.js API routes, the request is all kind of parsed for us automatically. So this is just JSON. I can automatically, it's automatically dealt with, and I can just begin to do this myself. So we're going to look up the user from Hasura. Let's just dive into register and get this same thing. Yeah, I'm going to copy the found part as well. and we'll just replace this here. And we'll move this down. If the user is not found, the message will not be unable to create an account, try another, but it's going to be along the lines of invalid email or password. Now, I'm never quite sure whether to put the full stop here or not and let the front end deal with that. Typically, I don't, and I do let the front end deal with that kind of thing. But like I said in the previous video, we'll probably implement some kind of I18N library to handle internationalization and locales for our project. So we'll probably just return at some point in the future, you know, a key here that we can reference in the front end. So we are looking up a user from Hasura by the email we've provided. And then simply, if the user is not found, we'll return an error. And we'll pass this as a 401 because we're logging in and it's not authorized. Or is it a 404? I can't remember. Yeah, I don't know if it's a 404. It'd be interesting to see what people think of that. I should go and have a look at the specification for the HTTP status codes. So I have a question or a comment. Let's load this in. So we have one question here. Hi, do you know how to use API? I have an API from a site, but I don't know how to make it into a program. Okay. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that entails, and then I can kind of maybe help direct you in the right place. Depending on what the APIs that you are using, they've most likely got some examples that you can use to kind of reference building your own thing. So whether you're using Next.js, React, Vue, Nuxt, Svelte, Sapper, whatever you're using, there will most likely be some reference examples that you can use when you're building out these things. So I'd recommend giving that a go. Have a look at their documentation and seeing how far you can get with that. So now what we need to do is we now need to probably check that, once we've got beyond this point of if the user is found, we need to check whether the password matches. So I'm simply going to do password matches, or passwords match, because we're passing in multiple passwords, and we'll pass this to, and we'll await bcrypt. And I think, if I remember rightly, this is compare. Is it compare? Yes. And then we pass in a string and then the hash. So the first string will be our, it will be the raw password, which is what we've input here. So I'll rename this one ID structure, and then we will pass it in password, and this password will come from here. So I'm going to need to return password here as well. So what we're probably going to have to do here is destructure password, and then I'm going to spread in everything else into the variable user, and we'll get that from found user. And yeah, that should work. Password goes to password here. That is the hash password, and we compare that with the raw password we passed into the endpoint. And everything else, such as ID, name, and email, these will then be spread into a new object of user, and then we can use that in the token. If the passwords don't match, let's just very naively return an error, and again we'll just return that same error. Bit of duplication, but we're live streaming. Let's not go down the rabbit hole of refactoring everything. Okay, so then we need to create the JWT. Well, that's easy. We've done that already. So we can just copy all of this. And we can add this here. So token is equal to jwt.sign. We pass in, it will not be insert users one anymore. That will be user.id. And I've updated the subject as well. And then all that's left to do is we do return the token and then everything else as the user. And we're importing everything I think we need. So let's run this. Let's run the dev server for Next. That is running on 3000. Okay, right. So if you remember, so far we don't have any kind of forms or anything. That will be in the next video. We'll create the register form, and then we'll go ahead and create the login form after that. But we can kind of just mimic the behavior that we need through these buttons. So we're already going to have this user here. So I'm just going to create a new user with the name John. Let's just change this to Nathan. So that'll say hello Nathan. So the name of the user will be Nathan, and then we'll have the email and password. So if we go back to here, we don't have a form. We just have the button that is going to mimic that functionality of submitting the form, and then we'll create the form afterwards. So we can see from the network request that went over to the database, or to Hasura, that we sent the name, email, and password over as well. Sent it in plain text. We've talked about that in a previous stream. And then we have this. Now, if I refresh the page, that login state will not be persisted. We're not handling that in any way. So if we go to login and we do the same, we will run into an error here. So what do we got going on? Why is this bugging out? So not found. Okay, we had this issue in the first video. It's simply the import path for here is incorrect. So we should be good now. So if we go back, refresh the page, click login, and then we get hello Nathan. So that's sent across the email and password. Now if we open up Hasura, just to double check this, I didn't do this previously, but if we go to data inside of Hasura and click on users, then if we go to browse rows, you'll see there we go, we've got Nathan, and this is coming from the database. And you can see that this password here has been kind of hashed, and it's got the salt in there and stuff. So we're pretty good. That is now going into the database in a safe way. We can probably delete these older records as well, because these are no longer required, and they won't be valid either with the password. So now all that's left to do, yeah, hi Nathan, thanks for joining. What we'll do now is we will look at creating a we'll look at, if we head on over to here, we'll look at persisting this this data as well. So when you log in, it will persist the user, and when you refresh, that data will in fact come back. Right. So what should we do for that? Well, what do we want to do? I have this library here that I found earlier on today. And that basically just allows us to install use persisted state, and then we can set persisted state and just use the hook here. And then we can indeed just kind of persist the user state. So when they return or it updates, it will kind of be reflected across tabs and windows and stuff. So I think that's what we need. Let's go ahead and install that dependency now. And we'll install use persisted state. And if you remember back to, I think it was the second video of the stream this week, what we did was we set up the auth context. And this was just simply a React context provider. So we have a function that is auth provider, and it just has some state, and it's using a reducer. And then it has all of the functions to kind of call our login endpoint and our registration endpoint and log out. So, and it wraps up like application with two different context providers, one for the actual state and then another for dispatch, and it keeps those nice and separate. So yeah, right now, let's have a look at using that library we've just imported, and we'll probably use that inside of the context provider. So let's have a look and see how this works. So import create persisted state, and then we'll do use counter state. What would we call this? It can't be or use auth state because we've got that. So let's do use persisted state. We'll do persisted auth state. And then this will be, this will be, what is that? Is that the initial value? No, that's going to be the key for local storage, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, so we pass the initial to that function. So we'll call this, let's just call it Jamstack Forum auth. And we should be good. We should be good there. Now inside of the auth provider, we'll pass in, what should we do? We'll pass in, so we're going to need, let's have a look how that was. That's count and set count. So we need our getter and setter. So we could call this saved auth state and save auth state. And then we'll do use persisted state initial state, and we should be okay with that. The initial state, it's an object, so we'll need to do JSON stringify and do this here. Then that initial state, use reducer. We don't want to pass in the, do we? We want to pass in, how does this work? Okay, so we're going to have the storage, we're going to have the state of the auth of the user in local storage, and then when it mounts, this use persisted state is going to return that value if it's in state. And when the reducer's initial state, when that hydrates and updates on the page the state, we need to pass it the data that's stringified. So we're going to have to do json.parse saved auth state. That should be what we're after here, right? So we have our state and dispatch using reducer, and the initial state comes from local storage, or the parsed value from local storage. And then anytime that data changes, we'll probably need to do use effect, and the dependencies of that. The only time we want to run use effect will be if the state changes, and then we'll pass in save auth state, right? And then inside of here, we will do again json.stringify, and then we'll pass in the value, and the value will be of state. So anytime state updates, the only way that can update is if we dispatch something. So if that state changes, this use effect is watching for that. If it changes, that is going to kind of kick off that effect. I don't think we need to return a function here to kind of remove anything. We're not watching specifically for anything on the window that's been kind of attached, or any event listeners. I'm going to imagine this here handles those events for us. Because one thing I did notice with this library is, where was it? There, the state is shared between any other hook using the same key, either on the same page, across tabs, or even browser windows. So that is going to have to look at events that are happening in the browser and watching for events that happen there, I imagine. If that is the case, that might not be how it is. It could be that the browser's default behavior does that, but I imagine there will be some kind of event listeners on the window, or I don't know, some API for local storage, checking that value if it changes. That library should clean up. I use the word should. I imagine it will. I imagine it could, but does it? We'll find out. Right, so now we are updating state, and now we're updating state. Now the state is persisted. We should be good. So I'm going to click login, and here we have this. And let's go into application, local storage, and then we've got Jamstack forum auth, and then we can see here error is null. Did I put error? I can't remember having error anywhere. Is authenticated as true. What is going on? Let's log that out. Let's click login once more. Is authenticated. There's no error in there. That is so weird. That is really weird. But anyway, it's bringing across the name, Nathan, and email as this email here, and then Nathan's token is in there as well. So now, fingers crossed, if we refresh, there we go. We get hello Nathan. So that is now persisted. So it doesn't matter how many times we refresh the browser. If we opened up this in a new tab, whoops. If we click log out and we go here and then we refresh, this will also be logged out. And then we can obviously log back in, refresh, that will stay logged in. We can log out, refresh, and we're logged out. So that persistence between the browsers is working. And if we click login and we go incognito, you can see it's still logged out as well. So that's not shared. Okay, cool. So we have authentication. Our authentication token is now stored, and that state is persisted using the use persisted state package. So shout out to the creator of that. Let's give it a star on GitHub because it's working. Awesome. I'm really impressed with that. It was so simple to set up and install, and it kind of just takes care of writing to local storage for me. And because we are in those pages are server rendered, that's obviously going to check. I'm saying it's obviously, and it should and it could. I imagine it would check to see whether or not window is defined. So we're not going to run into any errors like that. I'm sure if we go dive into the code, we could check that. We could check that out. So yeah, where is it? Create storage. So I'm guessing if there's a provider would be the window in this case. Yeah, global set. Yeah, use ref. Okay. Okay, so this is the use effect I was talking about. It's returning that kind of cleanup function. I think that's what that is anyway. Sweet. So if the key exists, it will save it. So I'm trying to think, is there anything else that we have to do for this? Let's just add everything we've done so far. So we have implement the login API route and persisted state. And we'll push that branch up to GitHub. And we head on back to GitHub. We can then click create, check the box for create API login. And for good measure, we will also just tag that we did persist auth state in auth provider with local storage. Okay, so it's just nice to kind of look back and see all the things we did. That's everything we did on there. So deployed in 26 seconds. If we head on over to the deployment preview, you can log in. This might not log in on, this won't log in on Vercel because we changed the secret in the last video, that we changed that admin secret. So if you are watching these videos in sequence, the previous video we changed the key, so I'll have to update that key on Vercel, and we'll be good. So yeah, we're getting there. So just as a reminder for anyone kind of tuning in for the first time, or watching these back and you've not seen the previous videos, what we are doing is we are creating a forum script, a forum software. This kind of takes me back to my childhood because I spent most of my teenage years hanging out on forums, learning how to code and actually build on my own. So there's kind of a bit of a throwback for me, and I think it's quite fitting for Hacktoberfest. Just kind of get involved, write some code, share it online, and just have some fun. Take some time out from the normal grind, and just have some fun building and kind of reminiscing on some past times. So we've got a forum here. Forums have threads, have topics, have posts, and those posts can be pinned, locked. And in our case, we are going to allow users to mark the threads as answered, so we can then filter between answered and unanswered posts. And we are going to call it Jamstack Forum. Name can obviously be changed. If you've got any suggestions, please let me know. But for this video, I think that's all that I've got time for today. It is just gone 7 p.m. and we did an hour and a bit earlier on today, and we did 3 or 4 hours yesterday. I will be streaming more tomorrow and Sunday. We'll probably tomorrow look at creating the login form. So we should be able to go to /login, and then we'll have a form for entering our name, email, and password. And then we'll do the same for login and registration. We'll do both of those forms probably tomorrow, depending how long that takes. And we'll probably use React Hook Form. I love that library. It's so nice and simple. It's pretty cool. It's pretty lightweight, and the API for it is really nice. So we'll explore more of that tomorrow. So we'll mark this pull request as ready for review. I'm going to trust you've all reviewed this and you would tell me if I've done anything wrong, or if anything could be improved. So let's go ahead and merge that into the main branch. Now we've saved that. We'll head back over and we'll see that we've merged in auth provider. So I think we're on good progress. Let's have a look at the issues that we've got open. So create registration flow. I wrote a small description that the form must capture name, email, password. And once the form is submitted, it will then create a token for the user. Well, we've done that, so we just use that token, and that automatically calls the context provider. So yeah, I think we're already ahead of ourselves. So we can implement that form. And yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that. So thank you very much for tuning in. I will be back on tomorrow, and we'll create those registration and login flows. So thank you very much. Happy coding, and enjoy Hacktoberfest. Enjoy whatever you're coding on. And enjoy. Happy coding.